Good afternoon, everybody. Doing a quick video response in regards to the gentleman's claim, specifically on Lucian of Samosata as being a testimony to the historicity of Christ. You're going to want to watch the last third part of the video. He talks about Josephus, he talks about Mara Serapion, as well as Lucian of Samosata. Those not familiar with Lucian of Samosata, he was of Assyrian descent. He wrote a numerous number of satirical works, poking fun at every calamity throughout the world, specifically the Greek world, during the latter part of the 2nd century. He references, the gentleman on the video references Lucian's work titled The Death of Peregrinius, which was written roughly around 160 CE. In that work, Lucian tells of a story of a common criminal who had killed his father, named Peregrinius. He was accepted into the Christian faith and turned into this philosopher type of individual. Lucian would describe how gullible the Christians were, how they worshipped a crucified sage, so on and so forth. In correlation to Lucian's work titled The Death of Peregrinius, he also wrote a work titled The Way to Write History. This work was composed roughly around 180 CE. And essentially what Lucian does is talk point by point on the proper way of producing a historical work, what the do's are and what the don'ts are in the proper way of writing history. It is extremely important to understand that after discussing all of this, Lucian pretty much sums up the fact that even though he was extremely capable of writing a historical work, utilizing proper historiographical methodology, he chose not to write history because he did not want to. He essentially claimed that there were two types of writing. There was poetry and there was history. He chose to write satirical pieces pertaining to every calamity throughout the known world, specifically within Greek culture. These documents, such as the Death of Peregrinius, were in the form of an epistle that he would write to other esteemed colleagues, friends, etc., etc. And he would state outright who the letters were addressed to. But it is important to understand that although knowing full well the proper way of writing history, Lucian tells us that he decided not to, that he doesn't want to, because he enjoys writing satirical masterpieces. He enjoys writing poetry, because the fancy of poetry is in the mind of the writer. There are no rules to follow. You don't have to be historically correct. You don't have to be historically accurate. You don't have to reference a number of different works in producing the story that you're going to portray. The only rule, as Lucian explained, is that of the poet's fancy. And the same can be attributed to biblical scripture. It is a poetical allegorical work. It should not be viewed as a historical work. While it may contain historical truths, at the end of the day, it is still a poetical work where the writers would not have to abide by common historiological methodology. Thucydides, in his work regarding the Peloponnesian War, was the first work that scientific historical methodology was set in place, proving that a historical work could properly be done and properly attributed to specific events that had transpired. Now, regarding Lucian's work on Peregrinius, there were several historical inaccuracies that I would like to discuss. First and foremost being that Jesus was referenced as a crucified sage. Now, sage kind of has a connotation of philosopher. He also talked about how there were Christian priests. Now, bear in mind that the events transpiring with Peregrinius took place at a time when the word priest did not even exist. He uses the Greek word presbytos. In Latin, it's illustrated as presbyter. This was simply a teacher, was a person who would go around and recite works, historical works, scriptures, satirical pieces, whatever the case may be, poetry. He interestingly uses the word priest and attributes it to a time when the word did not even exist. That's the first historical inaccuracy. The transliteration of the document itself calls Jesus, or translated as such, that he was a crucified sage. Now, interestingly enough, the word that he chose to use was not the correct Greek lexicon for crucified. He actually used a Greek word utilized for explaining impalement on a stake, much like the Assyrians did throughout the land of Persia, and can be compared to that of Vlad the Impaler. He pretty much portrayed that Jesus was impaled on a stake or a pole, not that he was crucified to a Roman crux or cross, as has been handed down to us through biblical literature. Those are two major historical inaccuracies. Aulus Gellius was a physician living in the 2nd century, was a Greek writer. He also discusses talk about a Peregrinius that he had met and come across in his travels. However, there is no mention of Christianity, and there is no mention of Jesus in that historical works. Peregrinius, as far as Gellius's account is handed down to us, is merely discusses a philosopher, that Peregrinius was a philosopher. It's very possible that Lucian took the story of Peregrinius's philosophy, his philosophical attitude on life after he had committed all those crimes. It was the point of Lucian in this satire that Peregrinius was a fool and made the Christians out to be fools as well, because they were so gullible, and he had distaste for the simple fact that they would attract every low social class walking individual from society. They attracted the thieves, the criminals, the crooks, the rapists, the degenerates of society, so on and so forth, and mainly the illiterate as well. This work comes far too late in history to be attributed to a historical Jesus. These are merely oral traditions that would have been handed down to his time, Lucian's time, and he merely utilized this story to point out and to utilize a poetical work to poke fun at the Christians, to poke fun at Jesus, to poke fun at Peregrinius, and use this as a good laugh to share with his good friends and esteemed colleagues. The work is nothing more than a letter, and Plinius the Younger tells us in his letters that what is contained within a letter is not that of history and should not be viewed as such. In fact, he goes to great length when in a personal letter to Tacitus, he tells him about the events leading up to his uncle's death during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. He tells him, hey, look, I'm telling you this in confidence. Please don't turn around and use this in a historical matter, because what I'm writing to you is not of a historical matter and should not be contained within a historical work. So I think it's very, very important to understand this. And if anybody's interested, you can pick up the Selected Satires of Lucian, translated by Lionel Casson, or Casson, however you want to pronounce it, and read The Death of Peregrinius, as well as The Way to Write History, and fully understand that this work is not a historical truth to Jesus of the Gospels, but merely a good laugh for a high social circle of friends to poke fun at the calamity of his day and the Christians as well.